Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Kamma. We are up to Perek Bet Mishnah Hey. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana Bad Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam Began Eden Amen and Avdir ben Chaim Nechaim with the Refuah Shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shachore Israel. This Mishnah deals with the fourth case of Muad mentioned in chapter 1, Mishnah 4, where an animal does care and damage in an area owned by the victim of the damage. Even if the animal is actually a tam, its owner must pay full damages as though it were a Muad. However, this law is not accepted by all. It is a subject of a disagreement. The Mishnah begins, Shora Mazik Birshut Nizak Ketzad. What is the case of the ox who is tam, that does care and damage in an area belonging to the victim of the damage? Nagach, if it gored, nagaf, pushed, nashach, bit, ravatz, squatted, ba'at, or kicked, birshut harabim, in a public place, mishalem chatzi nezek, its owner pays half damages, birshut nizak. But if it did so in an area belonging to the victim, it's a machloket, disagreement. Rabbi Tarfon says, nezik shalem. He pays full damages even though it is a tam. V'chachamim omrim chatzi nezek, while the sages say that he pays only half damages. And in chapter 1, Mishnah 4, where the Mishnah stated that full damages are required, that was following the opinion of Rabbi Tarfon. Now, Rabbi Tarfon bases his opinion on a logical argument known as a kal v'chomer. A kal v'chomer compares two situations, one whose laws are generally lenient, kal, and one whose laws are generally strict, chamur. If the Torah applies a strict ruling to the lenient situation, logic tells us that the ruling certainly applies in the strict situation. Amar lem Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon said to the sages, Uma b'makom she'ker al hashen v'al haregel b'rshut harabim shu patur. Since the Torah is lenient regarding shen, tooth, and regel, foot, that happen in a public place, ruling that the owner is exempt from paying, and yet it is strict regarding shen regel, tooth and foot, that happen in the victim's property, requiring the owner to pay full damages. We see that stricter laws apply to damage done in the victim's property than to damage done in a public place, because in a public place, if you have shen regel, the owner is exempt from paying. But if you have in a victim's property, if you have shen regel, you have to pay full damages. Makom shichmir ala keren birshut harabim leshalem chatzi nezek. If so, since the Torah is stricter regarding keren in a public place, in that it requires the owner to pay half damages, eino din shenachmir aleh birshut hanizak leshem nezek shalem, is it not logical that we should be stricter about keren in the victim's property and require the owner to pay full damages? Meaning, since the victim's property is treated more strictly than a public place with regard to tooth and foot, shen and regel, it should also be treated more strictly with respect to keren, horn. Therefore, since the owner pays for half of keren damage done in a public place, he should pay in full for keren damage done in the victim's property. That's Rabbi Tarfon's logical argument. The sages respond, Amrulo, they said to Rabbi Tarfon, Dayo laba min adin liot kanidon. It is enough for the new law, which is taught by the kal v'chomer, to be the same as the law from which it is derived, meaning it cannot be stricter than the law from which it is derived. The kal v'chomer can tell us only that if a stringent ruling applies in a lenient situation, the same ruling applies in a strict situation. It cannot tell us that an even stricter ruling should apply in the strict situation. Rabbi Tarfon's kal v'chomer can teach, according to the Chachamim, that since the owner pays for half of keren damage done in a public place, he certainly pays for half of keren damage done in the victim's property. But it cannot teach that he must pay for more than half of keren damage done in the victim's property. You can apply the stricter ruling, but you cannot go even stricter than the original case. Ma birshut harabim chatzi nezek. Rather, the Chachamim say, the sages say, just as the owner pays for half of keren damage done in a public place, Av birshut hanizak chatzi nezek, so does he pay for half of keren damage done in the victim's property. And in response, Rabbi Tarfon presents a somewhat different kal v'chomer. Amar lem, Rabbi Tarfon said to them, Ani lo adun keren mi keren. I will not derive the law of keren, damage done in the victim's property, from the law of keren, damage done in a public place, as I did before. Meaning, he says, I'll change my argument. Ani adun keren meregel. Instead, I will derive the law of keren from the law of regel and shen as follows. Uma b'makom she'ker al shen v'al regel b'reshut harabim. Since the Torah is lenient regarding shen, tooth, and regel, foot, as we see from the fact that the owner pays nothing for shen or regel damage done in a public place, hechmir b'keren, and yet it is strict about keren, as we see from the fact that he pays something, half, for keren damage done in a public place. Makom sheichmir al shen v'al regel b'reshut hanizak. Then in a case where the Torah is strict regarding shen and regel, tooth and foot, in that he must pay in full for such damage done in the victim's property, and no din shenachmir b'keren, is it not logical that we should be at least as strict regarding keren and require the owner to pay in full for keren damage done in the victim's property? Meaning, since in the case where damage is done in the victim's property, he pays in full for tooth and foot, shen and regel damage, whose laws are generally more lenient, he should certainly pay in full for keren damage, whose laws are generally stricter. The sages reject this kal v'chomer as well. Amrulo, they said to him as above, Dayo laba min adin liot kanidon. It is enough for the new law, which is taught by the kal v'chomer, to be the same as the law from which it is derived. Meaning, it cannot be stricter than the law from which it is derived. Even Rabbi Talfon's second kal v'chomer is based on the law of keren in a public place. Therefore, it can teach only that keren in the victim's property is the same as keren in a public place, but it cannot teach that it is stricter. Rabbi Talfon's second kal v'chomer is based on the fact that keren is stricter than shen and regel. However, we know this only because keren damage done in a public place requires some payment, whereas shen or regel damage done in a public area requires no payment. Since the law of keren in a public place is needed for the kal v'chomer, the law we derive from the kal v'chomer cannot be stricter than it in the original source. Therefore, ma b'reshut harabim chatzi nezek, just as the owner pays for half of keren damage done in a public place, av b'reshut hanizak chatzi nezek, so does he pay for half of keren damage done in the victim's property. And the Rav does tell us, v'halacha kechachamim, the halacha follows the opinion of the sages. And that is then of Mishnah Hey. Mishnah Vav deals with the last mu'ad listed in chapter 1, Mishnah 4, which is a person who does damage, Adam mazik. Adam mu'ad le'olam, a person is always a mu'ad, meaning he must always pay in full for any damage he does, ben shogeg, ben mezid, whether he damages by accident or on purpose, ben ben yashen, whether he damages when awake or asleep. A person is responsible for what he does even in his sleep. For example, if someone goes to sleep next to some vessels and breaks them as he moves in his sleep, he must pay for the damage. Since he should have realized before he went to sleep that he might hit the vessels, he is liable for breaking them. However, if the vessels were placed next to him after he was already asleep, he is exempt from payment because there was no way he could have known that the damage would occur. Even a person is not liable for damage that he could not possibly have avoided. The Mishnah continues, Simet and En Chavero, if a person blinded someone else's eye by accident, Vishiber et hakilim, or if he broke vessels by accident, Mishrem Nezik Shalem, he pays full damages. We will learn that when one person injures another, he makes 5 payments. He pays for the actual damage to the victim, meaning the loss of his value, were he to be sold as a slave. He pays for his pain, his medical cost, lost wages, and shame. Our Mishnah, however, mentions blinding an eye together with breaking a vessel, which implies that one who blinds an eye pays only for the actual damage, as is the law with breaking a vessel. This is because the Mishnah refers to one who blinded an eye by accident, and the rule in cases of accidental injury is that the damager pays only for the actual damage and not for any of the other 4 losses. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.